Hi, I'm George,
I'm Dave.
and we're Guitar Guys, and we think you probably are too. And we're here today to talk about guitars and gear, and specifically solid-state amplifiers. But before we do that, let me just tell you that Guitar Guys is brought to you by ToneShapers, and ToneShapers is a company that makes wiring products for electric guitars, and you can check out the website at www.toneshapers.com. Also, we'll have links to information in the description block below the video, so we'll talk about gear that we've used and have links to ToneShapers' website and other stuff as well. So have a look there for more information.
So what we have here today are two solid-state amps. We have a Quilter, we have a Roland. The Quilter is pure solid-state, no digital modeling at all. The Roland amplifier does have some digital technology, but it's not your typical digital amp with a bunch of delay, chorus, and tons of effects. It's pretty basic. Overdrive and reverb, that's it. They're both 112 amplifiers. Roland is 100 watts. I believe the Quilter is as well, but it goes up if you add another speaker. They're both pretty loud amps, but we have them fairly quiet today, and we'll A-B them for you.
And then we also thought, well, we would contrast them with a couple of tube amps. So this is a Fender Vibrolux Reverb. This is a circuit board amp. It's not an old blackface amp. It kind of has that look, but it really is. It's a modern amp. I think this one was made in the mid-1990s. And then we have a Dr. Z Maz 18 Junior. This is a 210 amp. This is a 112 amp. This is 18 watts. It's two EL84s. This has 6 L6s, and it is, I think it's 40 watts. So good opportunity to contrast the tube amps with the solid state amps, because solid state, it seems like maybe we've come to that point in history where arguably the solid state stuff is competing head to head and favorably with tube amps.
Absolutely. Roland, this isn't the best that Roland has to offer as far as their digital modeling solid state type of thing. I know that they have an artist series out now that's really good with an Eric Johnson model, and then there's Robin Ford, is it?
Robin Ford, yeah.
That stuff's really good. But this one sounds good too. So maybe we'll start off and we won't tell people what they're hearing.
Sure.
Let them decide.
Yeah.
But you guys at home can figure out if you like the sound of tubes better or not.
Okay, now that's cool. So just go ahead and start.
Just play?
Just play.
Okay. Okay, so here we go with no pedals, straight into one of the amplifiers. I'm going to add a tube screamer to that. Okay, now we're in another amplifier, and the tube screamer is still on. So now we've moved to another amplifier. We'll start off clean. Tube screamer. Okay, so now we're in another amplifier. Tube screamer hasn't been touched, it's the same setting. Turn that off. They all sound good in my opinion.
So with this amp demo that we've done, we're interested in your comments because, you know, right now the whole solid state issue is pretty contentious. I mean, there are a lot of people that have biases that are probably were founded in, you know, experience, but the world has changed. And so those biases can remain. And I have them myself, you know, I mean, I don't know if they're valid or not. I mean, these sounded great to me today. One of the things about this Quilter is it's so full-featured. We're going to do another segment on another episode where we really go through the features of it and A/B it directly against probably the Fender amp so that you can A, see all of the features and how everything works, but also so that you can hear A/B comparisons between this and a tube amp and really get an idea of everything that this thing's got, because it packs an awful lot into a small and very lightweight package. It's sort of surprisingly light, and again, these being both 112 amps, you can see how small this thing is. And when you pick it up, it's sort of
Oh, it's so light
surprisingly light.
and loud.
Yeah, it is loud, yeah.
So some of us on social media have recently read where Joe Bonamassa said that you know, pedals are for guys that are lazy, and you know, there's just no need to have all these pedals. And I tend to disagree with that. I think if you're that type of guitar player and you plug straight into your Fender amp and work your volume knob, that's great. And that works for you, that's great. But for other guitar players, you know, I think David Gilmour and The Edge from U2 have shown that the use of effects can be really creative and sometimes actually help write the song or write the part. I'd like to talk about some overdrive pedals, because an overdrive pedal is basically a preamp, distortion pedals, fuzz pedals, overdrives, and every amplifier has a preamp. So by adding a tube screamer or some cool overdrive pedal to your amp, you're just putting another preamp stage in. So why does it matter if your amp has 4 channels and then you say I don't use pedals, or your amp has 1 channel and you have 4 overdrive pedals? In my opinion, what's the difference? It's 4 preamp channels. So if they happen to be pedals, great. I have to do that sometimes live, because I'm not in a position to bring 5 amplifiers to a gig and just switch between when I want a Fender, when I want a Marshall, when I want a Vox. So sometimes I try to do that by setting the amplifier clean and having pedals that emulate those tones for me.
Well, I think to play devil's advocate, some people would say, yeah, but there's a difference between, a tube screamer and a tube preamp. So if somebody's using a Marshall head and they're saying,
and that's fair. I own a Chandler tube driver,
right,
which is an overdrive pedal that happens to have a 12AX7 preamp in it.
right,
And again, this gets back to the debate between tubes and solid state.
yes,
Some tube fanatics that only play through tube amps, their entire pedal board is made up of solid state preamp pedals. Tube screamers and boutique overdrives that don't use tubes. Where there are some tube, some overdrive pedals that do use tubes, but again, it's just a preamp. It's adding a preamp stage to your amplifier. So I don't see it as being lazy at all to have more options. When I go on a gig, if I have to cover 4 hours worth of music of lots of cover songs, rather than have 7 amps with me, I'm toggling between different overdrive pedals and EQs and trying to get as close to those tones as I can.
And I don't know what Bonamassa's real, if you could really sit down and say, but do you mean in this situation? And he may go, well, no, not in that situation. Or maybe he does mean in all situations, in all pedals. I don't really know. I'm sure he's taken a lot of flack from that article because so many people are into pedals. And I don't know if he's had some sort of second thoughts or about any of it or not. But my position is that there are no rules in music. It's like the argument between somebody saying death metal with some guitar through a dimed Randall stack is better tone or worse tone than some other amp. And of course, the beginning of that statement would always have to begin with, in my opinion. So it all just comes down to opinion. And at the end of the day, we're all just people with opinions and what we like or don't like.
What I'd like to add to that is, if you listen to the majority of Joe Bonamassa's music, he's playing to a very overdriven amp. Whether he's getting the overdrive from his fuzz face or he's getting it from his amplifier, he's really overdriven. He's got a great echo happening. It sounds like a combination of some reverb and maybe a touch of delay. I don't know if his front of house sound guy's doing it or he's doing it with rack effects. But it's on his studio recordings, it's on his live recordings. So if you're a guy at home that just owns a Fender Princeton that's clean, if you want to get even close to Joe Bonamassa's sound, you're going to have to buy a couple pedals.
Mm-hmm, right.
Whether it's a reverb pedal or an overdrive pedal, you're just not going to get it out of that Fender Princeton you got sitting there. So it's kind of interesting that the argument came from him and not from a guy who plays with more of a traditional Fender amp type of tone, like that sound of a Tele plugged into a deluxe reverb.
Like Chris Robinson of the Black Crowes. I think it was always kind of eschewed.
There are some guitar players out there that just have extremely pure tone of amplifier guitar. I don't see Bonamassa as being that guy. So it's interesting to hear that argument coming from him.
We love pedals. We both love pedals, and so do so many heavyweights. I mean, before you even get into the discussion about guys like The Edge, you can go to people like Mike Landau, or Michael Thompson, who owns dozens and dozens and dozens of pedals, or Tim Pierce, or there are guys that are fantastic guitar players who have these fairly elaborate pedal boards and things. So I think that alone sort of gives the counter argument, which is, hey, look, do what you like, and what sounds good to you. But also we were talking earlier about how some pedals can they don't just add something to the sound, they actually define a sound and can be used very musically. Why don't you?
I mean, let's think about Jimi Hendrix for a second. I mean, the Univibe and the wah-wah and the fuzz. Imagine if he didn't have them.
Yeah.
How different those records would have sounded. Now, I can only imagine that had he lived and seen what was going to happen with guitar, that his pedal board probably would have been pretty big, because he was, always pushing his producer and his engineer to be more creative and colorful, and they were, using tape delays in the studio and all at the board, panning things and doing what they could do so they could get this sound out that he had in his head. So if he had near the stuff that we have today, I think he'd be using it.
Yeah, I think so too.
They can be really creative tools, And maybe Bonamassa will clarify and say I was talking about more people that just rely on it rather than learn how to play. And of course you should always, try and better yourself as a player, and maybe just use the effects as a way to enhance a little bit of that, So for instance, here I have a delay hooked up, and you'll hear what it's doing. So it's giving me a tempo, and I can play to that tempo. Now, without the delay, that part sounds different. I'm not saying it sounds better or worse, but it's different. And sometimes, using some, I think The Edge was a great example of using delay to create rhythmic parts and atmosphere in songs that I couldn't imagine those songs without that stuff that he was doing.
Yeah, right.
And that's just one effect. I mean, you got Leslie effects to try and get that swirling organ sound, and there's just so many things you can do with pedals, and I don't think people should totally rely on them, but to just abandon them seems odd.
Yeah, and I'll go a little further and say it seems like for any prominent player who commands a lot of attention when they say something, that it seems surprising that anybody would sort of make a comment that would put an awful lot of players out there in a box as sort of in a negative way.
Yeah.
So it's surprising.
I had to return my Joe Bonamassa fuzz face. I sent it back. No, I'm just kidding.
And let's also say, look, we both love Bonamassa's playing. I love his songs. I'm a huge fan of Black Country Communion, and I assume you are as well. So we don't dislike the guy, but we just think that the statement probably was unfortunate. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so that's it. We're about out of time. The camera's about to shut down, so we're just going to say goodbye. And thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed what we did today.
Yeah, that was fun. Take care.